Peter Krueger, thank you for joining. I really appreciate it.
Well, Jason, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
You're the very first Jobbers podcast. It's also my first podcast.
Wow, that's an honor. I know that we talked about this 6-8 months ago, and to actually be part of it is very cool.
Yeah, hopefully we do a decent job, but at the end of the day, it's just carrying on a conversation, and we know how to do that. So
I do.
All right. Well, before we get started, I want to get into your bio, but just for a little brain warm up, I got a few questions for you.
All right.
Are you a morning person or a night owl?
I'm morning.
What's your favorite comfort food?
Probably meatloaf.
Meatloaf, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not a meatloaf lover. What's your favorite TV show or movie?
I like Reacher and Yellowstone. I've just started trying to get into Landman.
It's a great show.
Yeah, and I'm struggling a little bit because anyway, those three.
I like Landman a lot. My mother-in-law thinks it's a little bit too crude, the language and some of the other content, but I think it's amazing. All right. What energy source do you interact with most on a daily basis?
Petroleum.
What type of petroleum?
Well, we deal with all the fuels, gas, propane, diesel, obviously, really anything, any liquid fuel that powers transportation.
Most people don't realize that. Glad you do. If you had to give the 47th president, Donald J. Trump, a grade on his second administration thus far, and it's not been very long, what would it be?
I'm at an A right now, thinking going to A+. I just love what he's done. It's just great.
Yeah, it's amazing to see. All right, last question for the brain fire up. Powerboat or sailboat?
Oh, it's obviously a sailboat.
Why?
Well, I started off sailing up at Lake Tahoe. This is back in the golly when I was born. I went to college, 60s. So it's just something, and you can say about the wind, but it's the competition. That's probably so I sail competitively. I mean, you can get in a sailboat and let the wind take you where you want to go, but in a sailboat, in a race, you've got to go where the course is. So that's the reason.
And you just got back from America's Cup?
Yeah, I went to Barcelona, and it was fun because I was there just for the finals. And so the Brits beat out the U.S. and all the Swiss and everybody else. So they were up against the Kiwis. And the first couple of days, and we were on the shore, but it was, they had sort of camps or, the conclave or, areas with big screen. And it was fun just to be around all the Brits, but they got their, kicked. It was like they never showed up to be competitive. And so out of 7 races, they won 2. So.
Not a very good showing.
No, but it was fun.
All right.
I love Barcelona, by the way.
Well, good. Before we carry on with the rest of our conversation, I did just want to give a little bit of your bio, and we'll dive into this a little bit more as we go on. But so, Peter, you received your bachelor's degree in political science from Utah State University. You had some military service that we're going to cover as well. You also received a master's degree in business from Webster University. Ended up becoming the president of I3 Public Affairs, government affairs firm, lobbying firm. Over 35 years representing the Nevada Jobbers as our state association executive. And in 2024, I think to the surprise of you won a Lifetime Achievement Award at the WPMA Expo.
Absolutely.
And we're right now at WPMA 2025. So, all right, with that, let's get into
cover the date so we know what day this is.
No. Those dates were long ago.
No, talk about the date today. You were
today. Yeah, today is, what is the date today?
Today is February 17th, 2025.
And the expo kicks off February 18th tomorrow.
Yeah.
All right. Well, before we get to the expo, tell us a little bit about, where did you grow up? How did you end up in Utah studying political science?
It's an interesting story. At least I think it is. So I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, Walnut Creek. My dad had his own tax service. It was like, he wasn't a CPA, but he was a full accountant, and he represented people like Safeway stores and did property taxes. So grew up there, went to high school there, played a little football, high school football, and it got time to go to college. And my parents didn't want me to go to Nevada because it's party school, as you know, and nor to Chico.
Also a party school?
Yeah. And I'm not LDS, but I was able to get into Utah State and, showed up there all by myself, didn't know a soul in what would have been September 1962. And lived in a dorm, it was those quad things, and became close friends with young men from all over Idaho and Utah. And that was cool. And then I think it was second semester, rushed fraternities, and I became an SAE.
Sigma Alpha Epsilon out there.
Yep. And was...
Phi Alpha?
Yeah, for sure. I was going to say all the way, which is an airborne thing. So I did that, became EA, and there's a long story to that because I was off skiing and the fraternity brothers got into trouble. And so I come back. And,
shocker.
Yeah, something like that. And so the House Corporation or the alumni decided that since I wasn't involved, the only reason I wasn't involved, I wasn't there. So I became the EA and did that for a year and I was house manager and all that kind of stuff. And I found that experience in college a life entertaining life. I mean, a lifelong friends.
Yeah.
And it to this day have got friends that were either skunk brothers, went through Hell Week together and all that. It just incredible.
What was Hell Week like in your day?
Well, so it depends who's going to see this. They probably don't do this.
Just the general, yeah.
Well, we had a thing called, was it Blue Light? And the whole thing was based on where the whole skunk class failed. And they put us up there and told us that we were not successful in our skunk activities and going through rush, and that we weren't going to become members. Every one of us. And there were probably in my class, there was 10, 15 maybe. And you can imagine where that went from there. So that was sort of the drama of how the fraternity did its thing. And I don't know what they do today. It's probably a lot less. But it created a bond, not so much with the brothers, but with your class, because you all thought. And then there was a period of time when you were told that you were all by yourself. Anyway, it was fun.
I had a similar experience. Yeah. I have my cousin's son is he just went through a fraternity at U of A, not Sigma Alpha Epsilon, but it's okay. And I was telling him that the three things that I got out of it, you definitely work on your social skills. You have to work on your speaking skills because you got to get up there and present to the brothers, whether it's the Greek alphabet or whatever it is. You have to be able to present. And you also have to you have to come to grips with humility. We were big into hazing, and I won't get into everything, but our Hell Week was mental and physical torture. So we had a similar situation where you go into Hell Week, it's a little bit of a beat down. You're doing some crazy shenanigans. And then about 2-3 days into it, you don't know when this thing's going to end. You have no idea what day it is because you're going day and night. They basically tell you that you all failed or you have to start over again. So you're thinking this thing is endless. So it's just this mental torture that you go through it. And yeah, you form a bond with your class in particular. Feel good to be, initiated into fraternity and now you're a brother, but those 8 or 9 guys or 30 guys or however many you went through, like you're just closer with them because you had this shared experience.
We had some older guys because this was right during Vietnam, 62. And so we had a number of older guys going back to college. So there was that dynamic. We weren't all 18-year-olds. And so that was another dynamic that made it fun. But you're right. It created a bond that is lifelong.
Yeah. I actually found out when I was pledging that my grandfather was an SAE.
Oh, wow.
He called me up one day randomly. I think my mom might have told him that like I was pledging or something like that because I wasn't super close with my mom. So he calls me and he's singing a Sigma Alpha Epsilon chapter song. I'm like, how the hell do you know this song? And he goes, I was an SAE. And he had a similar story where he wasn't an 18, 19-year-old. He was a West Texas high school football standout. And his dad told him, well, that's great. You can go play college football, but first you got to serve your country. So he went into the Marine Corps and he was a canine guy. So he was one of the dog handlers and then went off and fought in Korea. And his dad told him, he's like, if you do this, you'll go back and play football and you'll be a man amongst boys. And he always said, he's like, my father was right. It almost killed me, got a Purple Heart and everything like that. But I did make it back. And he's like my maturity level compared to the rest of the guys. Cause he ended up going and playing football at TCU. Yeah. And he actually got to play against Jim Brown in a bowl game. So yeah, he was a great guy and we had that connection,
and there was that piece about the older, even carrying over to us younger guys.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a maturity there that they bring to the table. So that's awesome.
And a lot of experience that we hadn't experienced yet.
So what was next after you graduated with your bachelor's?
During my political science studies and whatnot, I was in ROTC, a Reserve Officer Training School, which was an Air Force program. So I graduated on June 3rd in 66 and was commissioned as a second lieutenant. Well, this was right in Vietnam. And we took all the pilots had come out of the missile business. We had the Strategic Air Command and the Minuteman Force. So all the young officers were going off. And so my first duty assignment was in Rapid City, South Dakota. And, and talk about another character building. Here you are, 2 officers, was a captain and me as the lieutenant, with responsibility of 10 ICBMs. And if you wanted to know, you know where they were targeted to. And so I did that for 2 years and then was selected to go into, as the Russians got better in their targeting, we created a system where you flew and you could launch the missiles from the air. So it was Airborne Missile Launch Program. So I did that and then was selected to go to the Air Force Academy as an instructor, was there. And from there, because I'd gone to Army jump school with the cadets, so that was fun. I got assigned to a group, combat controllers, which is really the forerunners. We are the forerunners to Delta Force. And at the time, I was gone a lot. My wife, I had 2 children by then, didn't think much of me being gone and all that kind of stuff. So her dad had a business, wholesale aviation parts. So it's corporate and general aviation. So I did that and opened a Reno branch, which is, I didn't want to go back to California. And that was fun. I ran that for a whole bunch of years. And then my father-in-law, great guy, passed away. And the son, I was the outlaw in all this, so I didn't have any equity in all this. So they wanted me to stay, and it just wasn't comfortable. So that's when here I am thinking, okay, what am I going to do? And like so often happens in business or in life, really. So a friend of mine knew my background, and the Nevada Petroleum Marketers had hired just a year before a woman named Deanna Dowdy. And she wasn't the lobbyist. She was more the executive director. Because up till this was about 1987, Nevada was part of the Utah territory, and as far as the Western Petroleum Marketers are concerned. So we became our own state, essentially, chapter. And the The first president was an ARCO distributor out of Elko. So they were looking for somebody. Deanna didn't want to. They had a contract lobbyist, somebody else, and she didn't want to do it. And so a friend of a friend said, I ought to, compete for this. And I don't know who else was ever involved. Maybe nobody, but this is a story that I think is worth telling. So the president was a gentleman of the state association, was Jim Smitten from Fallon. It was Smitten Oil at Tire and Oil. And the incoming president was John Haycock of Haycock Petroleum here in Las Vegas. So I was invited to a restaurant in Reno for lunch. And so I get there, and timely and all, and because I'm a very punctual person. And one of the first questions after the niceties was, would you care for a drink? And I said, I'm thinking this is a setup. I can see that they're testing my character or whatever. Well, I, of course, said no. Come to find out, they've been there since, let's say, 10 o'clock, consuming Bloody Marys and whatnot. So anyway, I got the job, did have a Bloody Mary or two.
That was going to be my question. Did you have a drink?
Yeah, I did in the end. And so this would have been 1988. This would have been like, I'm going to say September, October of 88. So I had never met Jerry Tedrow, who was the executive director, as you know, from the national or the regional group, WPMA. But there was a board meeting up in what state of Washington, Tri-Cities of all places. So I go there. I had met Smitten, who was the president. He was there, going to be there. Well, he was late. So I'm there, and it's now time for the Nevada report, give some kind of state report. Well, I didn't know anything. Well, fortunately, Smitten got there and whatnot. But that's where I met Ronna Alexander. She was the Montana exec, and she had been hired about 6 months before me. And we became fast friends. And so she was one of the first women in the group. And so it was just that's how it all started. And just we had went through periods of time when really it was hard to find principals, as it is now. It's a challenge because the industry's changed. We went times when we had mid-level and managers as president of the state association. And of course, they didn't exactly know. And I'll tell one other quick story. We're up in the state of Washington, and WPMA really turned around when some Washington marketers, jobbers, Krueger, Rambo, we call him, and some of the others really came in and cleaned house as far as how the association was run. And so they took, our budget was upside down. I mean, bad. And so they didn't invite me in. They invited the president and vice president who were not owners and just read them the riot act. These guys came out and damn near quit. I mean, they weren't ready for this. But anyway, we got through it. And after that meeting, so we're now probably in 1990 or so, we've had a balanced budget and made money every year ever since. So when I was brought on board, this would have been the latter part of 88, the first legislative session, because I was brought on with the idea that which I wanted to do, is be the government affairs, the lobbyist for the association. So my first session was 1989. Show up in Carson, didn't know anybody. But I met the lobbyists for the major oil companies, and the ARCO had their own lobbyist at the time. And before I became involved with the petroleum group, the Nevada legislature passed something called petroleum divorcement. And it really was because of ARCO. ARCO had, and Jack Kaysen knew all about this, had a plan. and it became public that essentially said they were going to drive prices down at their stores and put independents out of business. Well, the legislature, because of a retailer, Jack Greco, got wind of this. And so they passed divorcement. That simply is very much like alcohol in the sense that a refiner could not own a distributorship and or retail. It was really aimed at retail as opposed to distributorship. But our distributor members, our jobber members, this was a boon. And so now all the major oil company retail operations, company ops, they had to divorce them. They had to sell them off. And
what year was this?
This
roughly
would have been 1987.
Okay.
So it stayed in effect until the 90s, and we didn't know it, but we were involved in modifying the law. So for a period of at least 10 to 12 years, our jobber members had no competition with company ops, none. And it was a growth of Rebel Oil and others that knew how to run a business.
Haycock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Herbst was the other big advantage of that. So it stayed on the books, and then ARCO came to us and said, hey, because they were really the drivers of this whole thing. They had lost it when they built the legislation passed, but they wanted to modify it. But they were willing to say that those stations that were already divorced, or in other words, they had supply agreements, would stay. So they weren't going to somehow take retailers out, because they were mostly independents, independent business people. So what we found out later, this was ARCO's way of cleaning up the books for the purchase with BP. So they wanted to clean it up, and the cleanup was that the stations that had that were divorced would stay that way, and though it took away the restriction of refiners owning retail, but here in Nevada, I'm believing market conditions, they really never got back in that business. To my knowledge, and it's a year old at least, but not any much more, there is not one company op station in the state of Nevada that I know of. They're all owned by individuals and whatnot. So that was my real fire or trial by fire. And it was fun. It wasn't, and I'm not going to say that I was a brand new lobbyist. I mean, I came along and because by then, well, actually, 10 years later, I had enough experience, so was able to work with the members. But that was probably a huge piece of legislation. There was even talk of national divorcement, never happened. But
yeah, I was going to say that's a particular to Nevada state issue.
There were a couple of other states that did it and tried it, but I don't think to the success that we did for our membership, and that was a big deal. And
volume is vanity, right?
Yeah.
Profit is sanity. And
correct.
When you hear these things and they make sense to you and they resonate with how you perceive the world and your business, you hold on to them.
So you can have the nicest trucks, the nicest facilities in the world, the lowest cost of goods possible. But if you have bad people, you'll find a way to screw it all up.
Nobody walked across water. We're all human. We are going to make mistakes. Just acknowledging it and moving on is really one of the most important things. I know that it's difficult for people that have been here for a long time because we're trying to change it. We've been too generous, and now we're trying to put the toothpaste back in the tube. And it's really tough, but it's necessary.
Particularly necessary if you go through a year like 2022 when fuel prices shoot through the roof, because all of a sudden your cash drops considerably and your inventory and your AR balances go through, and that can create a real big cash flow problem. So these things are protectionary. If you're doing them at a time when you have normal stable commodity prices, people might think that you're being a tough guy. But 3 months, one war, some geopolitical event on another part of the world can significantly hinder the company. can wipe out your cash like that.
Every petroleum jobber seems to be made up with a little bit of different clay and mud and rock and glass. We're not in the business of charging finance charges to make money. It's designed as an incentive for people to pay us on time.
We mentioned the Nevada Petroleum Marketers State Association, WPMA. Can we backtrack a little bit just to explain what that is?
Sure.
So the state association, let's start there. And you maybe take us through the history because it continues to evolve, and the relationship to the regional association of WPMA and even the federal body of EMA, just so people understand, how you work with and for the industry.
Yeah. Well, Nevada and most of the Western states, with the exception really of California, are small, and they don't have, or they can't support a full staff, and people run offices and
put on conventions and everything that goes with. Yeah,
absolutely. So the regional group, Western Petroleum Marketers, is really an alliance of states. There are currently 8 of us, 8 states. Nevada became part of that, as I indicated, in the I think it's in the 80s or 70s. But in fact, Claire Haycock was one of the first leaders of WPMA from the state of Nevada. But I guess it's really the key is that we are autonomous. The members elect their own officers and directors. The officers and directors hire an executive director. In this case, was me for 34 years, which I'm so honored to have served.
And that the state executive's responsibility for the association is what?
Day-to-day management. Be sure the budget, really the big thing, as I referred to before, is the budget balance.
And also to keep the oil companies in that state, to keep them informed of what's happening with, legislation.
Well, government affairs part. Yeah. That really, I have always focused on the budget. We equally, or actually more important, is the government affairs piece, because for a lot of reasons, our members are working. They don't have time to go to Carson City. So we're in Carson City looking after bills and legislation that could be either helpful to our members, like the petroleum endorsement bill, or bills that are troublesome. We've been involved with a whole bunch of those, where indexing is probably the best example of that. So indexing involved Clark County, Las Vegas, and Reno, Washoe County, and where they simply charge extra on the top of the federal, the state.
Extra taxes.
Yeah, taxes. And so we were opposed to that. We weren't successful, but we've been successful in reining in and keeping the lid on this thing, because there's nobody worse than the government wanting to spend more money of the taxpayers' money. So that's how it works. But you're 100% right. The real job one is government affairs, and the rest of it we put on different fundraisers and activities like that help support the show. And we're, as you know, a small state. And through mergers and acquisitions, we're getting smaller as far as the membership. And that's a huge challenge it was for me. And as I stepped down Miranda, the whole idea of attracting small businesses, because most of them are pretty small. A lot of them don't quite see the value, and it's too bad. But we work hard at that.
Yeah, I mean, the pitch for me is you definitely want a seat at the table, if nothing more, just to make sure that you're not on the menu.
Yep.
And I think it's fair to say we probably spend a lot more time modifying or trying to eliminate terrible bills for businesses than we do trying to pass legislation.
That's 100% right is the observation. I'll bet I can't count on, or I can count on one hand, the number of proposals, legislation we've gone through. We have worked hard, and the seat of the table is, and the menu analogy is 100% right, because if you're not there, if any group, and people say, oh, those nasty lobbyists, and it's nothing more than a person who's informed about a particular thing. In my case, it's petroleum, knowing just enough of my members' business, not knowing your business, but enough so that I know I'm going to pick up the telephone and say, this case, Jason, take a look at this legislation. This doesn't feel right, doesn't sound right. And that goes on. It's going on now. We're in the 25th session. We're in the 2025 session. The legislature started earlier this month. We're doing that same thing. And it's more of a challenge now for me when I was doing it full time, because like any relationship, you grow up and know legislators, and there's a dialogue there. There's a
rapport.
Rapport, exactly. Yeah. Now legislators are younger, newer. The worst thing that ever happened in my mind in Nevada was, in other states, is term limits. Because while people say, well, we get rid of the bad ones, we also get rid of the good ones, and essentially the history and the corporate memory is gone.
Yeah.
So I'm not a fan of the whole idea of term limits. But anyway, so we work independently, and as you know, we're here in Las Vegas for the annual meeting, the big convention, and but it also, the states work very closely together. We're now 8 states, and it's a good relationship. But if I have an issue in Nevada, Miranda does, we can call we can call really any state, because that rolls into the national group like you're talking about. And it's not uncommon that, every couple of 3 weeks we'll query either for sure the states, or maybe on a national level, have you seen legislation like this? Or how did you defend against legislation like this? And that's very, very common. And so,
because a lot of times it will bleed over states. What might start off, isolated in California quickly can expand to all Western states.
Because legislators go to meetings just like we do, and they hear about the newest, sweetest idea to make money.
Tax revenue generator, yeah.
And so they come back and they go, this will be a great bill. We should do this. Well, they don't understand the Nevada legislature really operates on a shoestring. They have no staff. At the individual legislator level. So so we have 48 states that are members of what's now called the Energy Marketers Association of America. And that's a national federation. And they pay attention and keep us informed on federal law. One of the important jobs is that, and I know you do this, and go back to Washington at least once a year and meet with our delegation. And we have five elected officials, obviously 2 senators and 3 House members. And it's an opportunity for them, if they'll listen, to hear what's going on from business people. So that's probably one of the biggest advantages of the national organization. And it's well run, but again, between what they do at the national level and on federal regulations also allows us to have an insight with other executive directors and that works out. So does that explain kind of
It does explain the relationship between the Nevada State Association, the regional association of which we're a part of, and then how Nevada essentially has a seat on the board of Energy Marketers of America, also known as EMA, where we go and discuss the federal legislation. And that's really where you kind of bring harmony with all the different states and say, hey, what are the main topics that we want to discuss this year when we go up to our day on the Hill? And you mentioned that lobbyists get a bad rap. And I think it's an interesting anecdote because fundamentally, I'm more of a free market guy. I'm a Milton Friedman economist. But when people give lobbyists a bad rap, my response to them is, well, shrink the size of the federal government, shrink the size of government oversight. And guess what? You won't have as much of a need for lobbyists, or increase the accountability of our elected representatives. And then you don't need lobbyists as much.
And I think more so than that last idea is probably something I hopefully will see more of, is shrinking the size of government. And you're right. It's why do people need to go, except that it's one of the precepts of our democracy, or our being a republic, is that we as citizens are allowed to petition our government.
100%.
And that's exactly what lobbyists do. Are there bad lobbyists? There are some, but
Sure.
most lobbyists understand that you only can tell a untruth once. And once you've done that, your credibility is gone forever. Now there are exceptions, but I just think it is a heck of a responsibility and an honor to serve and your membership to the best of your ability. Now, we don't always get it right, but for the most part, we do.
Yeah. Well, we've gotten it right a few times. I mean, just at the federal level, when we go to DC every year, can you talk about some of the bills that we've essentially killed, bad legislation that was going to be passed until they actually heard from the business owners of their states across the board, and they realized that maybe this isn't the right course trajectory?
The one that comes to mind the quickest is the whole thing, and you know about a fleet of liquid hauler tank trucks. Somewhere along the line, a legislator, or I think this came out of the agency, was concerned that, as you know, and everybody else, because you're driven by a bunch of tank trucks, see a bunch of pipes hanging underneath the big tank. Well, there was a thought that those, because they're wet, in a sense they have fuel in them, that was unsafe and it ought to be changed. Well, you can't put the pipes internally in the big tank. So they had all sorts of fancy ideas that would have cost you millions of dollars and our other members that have their own transports to put valves and some kind of check stuff so the fuel stayed in the big tank, and they were dry. So if they got hit, no fuel would come out. Well, the interesting thing was whether it was the EPA or Federal Highway Administration, Department of Transportation, couldn't point to any significant losses or accidents where this was a problem. This was a perfect example of legislation
being created for hypothetical problems that may or may not occur in the future.
Yeah, and what's the saying about seeking a solution, a problem? There's a saying like that. But that's exactly right. We've also been very, very forthright in working on some of the federal government has a problem on renewables and rebates and things that affect our jobber members, getting the money. There is some tax credits that above my pay grade here, but that our members who make a business decision to sell particular kinds of fuel and make a market for it get some credit. Well, it seems like every year the federal government can't decide if they're going to renew this program. And I think now, after being on top of this for, I don't know, probably a dozen years, I think we're very close to, if they haven't passed, sort of an automatic renewal of these kinds of tax credits. Now, you can argue about tax credits, but that's the law. So as long as it's there, the government is obligated to refund in a timely manner. That was the problem.
Yeah, I think that was when we went up there. What was it, around 2018 or 2019? The biodiesel tax credit was one of the main issues. It didn't get renewed. They had all these tax credits out there with distributors that essentially had a lot of money waiting on the sidelines, and only if they renewed this program. And really, it was, I think, the advent of the renewable fuel standard, which was a Bush era push, correct?
Yeah.
W.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was, hey, let's be less dependent on foreign oil, and then let's transition, 10% of our domestic into a feedstock like ethanol. You can still get the same octane ratings, the same spec fuel. So government gets involved in the fuel game, complicates the fuel game, subsidizes industries. Industry supports that by propping up businesses and industries, and then tax credits go away, and it puts the industry on unstable grounds. So we're back in DC lobbying them just for stability. And one of the things that I think we advocated for was we're not a proponent of subsidies. We feel like the best energy source should win. But if you're going to prop up an industry and subsidize it, at least tell us how much runway we have. If you say, hey, you're going to be subsidized at $1 a gallon this year, then 2 years later it's 50 cents, and then 2 years after that it goes away, at least everybody knows the bandwidth, the timeline, the runway that we have. But if 1 year you're operating, with your business under, certain production issues, because essentially it costs more to produce it than you can sell it for, you don't get the subsidy, and the next year subsidy is gone, the industry will die overnight. So it was just trying to create some continuity to some of these policies that they really enacted that we're trying to live with.
And that's a good example, but there are others. I mean, they're probably right now, I think there's 4 or 5 major issues. UST, underground storage tanks, is a major issue for this industry. We all are very, very cognizant of cleaning up leaking tanks in Nevada. And there's some federal legislation. We in Nevada took the lead in creating, it was a federal government mandate that said that anybody that owned a underground storage tank had to provide financial responsibility. And by that, they meant that if you had a leak as a tank owner, you had to have the resources, and it had to be, whether it was a bond. I mean, there were some pretty significant things. This association went to bat with Major Oil, with our Federated Insurance, and we created a underground storage tank. As you know, you sit on the board, and it has saved not only our environment by cleaning up these tanks, but it's also provided the federal financial responsibility that there would have been very few, jobbers in Nevada that could have met that requirement. So that was one of our big piece of legislation. It still tinkers out there with the feds, and I know that's one of the things that you'll talk about in DC. And wet lines was the term that applied to the other example I gave. But no, it's again, there's probably no better way to think about this is lobbyists allow any business that employs them to be there, listen, talk to the membership, because after all, I don't know your business like you do or any of our members' business, but I get members' input.
Yeah.
And then I can talk intelligently, or we have members come to, whether it's DC or come to Carson City. And we had a member just last session, it would have been 2023, that it was a mining bill, and it was called Pit Lake Bill. And it was Mackenzie Campbell, who's our vice president now, who testified because, as I think everybody knows, the mining industry is a huge, huge consumer of diesel fuel, lubricants. It's what makes all that machinery go. And so there was a bill that would have it was an environmental bill, but the fact that we as an industry, recognizing the role we play in mining, stepped up to, and we had real legitimate petroleum reasons that this Pit Lake bill would work.
But you're also supporting your customer base. I mean, like you said, mining in Nevada is a huge economic driver. There's a lot of jobs associated to it. We have a lot of those minerals here. We should be accessing the minerals here domestically, as opposed to relying on outside sources to bring that in. And hopefully with this administration, that'll pick up. So it's looking out for your customer base. It's also looking out for your own best interest, because like you said, yeah, if they want to make all haul trucks, EV haul trucks, first of all, good luck with your load capacity. And secondly, that's crippling to our business. It's also inefficient and extremely expensive, not only on the CapEx side, buying those haul trucks. I've seen them. They're ridiculous, whatever. But if you have to recharge that instead of having that haul truck actually dealing with production, what does that do for your mine production? Goes down.
So those are I think the role that a state association plays. In fact, I know it is. My only kind of disappointment is that many of jobbers in Nevada, retailers, and as hard as you try to market or to tell them the advantage of why they ought to be a member, that old syndrome of, well, I'll let Jason do it. And it's not expensive. I mean, that's the other thing. Our dues are reasonable based on gallonage. I mean, it's just a perfect thing. And so that's the challenge for our association, or one of our challenges too.
Yeah, there is value there. I mean, it's almost like going to the dentist or buying insurance. Is it the most exciting thing to sit there and listen to legislative updates? No, but it's important. Just like going to the dentist is important, just like having insurance is important. So, I mean, I would advocate that anybody that's in our business, whether it's a small single C-store operator or somebody that's got a multi-state jobbership, you should join the state associations because, as you discuss, consolidation, we're not immune to it. It's happening with our industry. And every time, some big player gobbles up a smaller player, that's one less member, that's one less advocate. And again, like, you want to have a seat at the table as these policies are changing, or else you might be on the menu.
And for the legislator's standpoint, when a large corporation, out-of-state corporation, buys a number of local jobberships or convenience stores, that impact is diminished with legislators because they understand that it's not Billy Bob or Susie Q that's in their community, operating their business, supporting voting.
Yeah.
These, other people can't vote, contribute to the Little League, all these kind of things that family businesses over the years have done. Not to say that some of these bigger companies don't do that, but it's not the same. I mean, we've had people in Elko, all over, especially rural Nevada, where the jobber or the C-store operator can really be likely the focus of so many business activities in that community.
Yeah.
And while it's not true in our big urban areas as much, it's still the day of the family-owned jobbership and C-store, with a few exceptions. And every day I thank my lucky stars that we still have some. But that impact, when a family-owned Nevadan goes to the legislature or calls or talks to their legislator, that has an impact.
Yeah, it's a community stakeholder versus a non-community stakeholder. It's important. I mean, you see it. You see the ripple effect through the community in a very positive way when you have those family-run businesses. And if you're a family-run business like ours that's growing, that's good, right? You're not, no offense to private equity, but you're not some big private equity-backed company that's gobbling up a bunch of family businesses. If you are growing, you should still get involved in the state associations as you continue to grow, because it changes from state to state, and you should be informed on what's happening in that state. And you should be involved in that community.
And one of our big challenges of the association is keeping essentially track of where your businesses are and who those elected officials, not just yours, but all our members. So that when there's some legislation that affects your business and it's in we got a particular legislator that's either sponsoring the bill or is going to vote for it, and it's an opportunity for you to pick up the phone or text or whatever it is, maybe meet with them and explain as a Nevadan and as a local business owner the impact that what this idea unintended consequences
to the business, to the constituents, to the community. It has ripple effects. I know you wanted to get into some of the highlights or takeaways that you've had from your career involved in our association. We talked a little bit about biodiesel tax credit. We've also worked on some tobacco laws that were big and I think had a federal impact. At least that's what Rob Underwood says. But what are some of the other things that you're actually, I would say, proud that you were able to work on during your tenure?
Well, thanks for asking. In these years, it's one for me of it's not a job. This has not been a job. I've met the most incredible people, not only our members, but people that represent other industries. We have worked really hard to let the state know who we are and that we are the local fuel supplier. I still like the term fueling Nevada because that's what we do. But the other thing is, besides the people, I talked to you about the whole, maybe I haven't gone there yet. One of the early pieces of legislation before my time, but it's continued through this day, is a collection allowance. So
the Nevada excise tax 2% collection allowance, it's big.
And people say, well, why is that there? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One, and it's not quite as prevalent today, but we had something called shrinkage, and that's where, so everybody knows, fuel is volatile, and as it gets warm, it goes into the atmosphere. Where some of the smog comes from. But the big reason today that we still have it on the books is that a load of fuel is paid for tax-wise, whether the jobber or the business ever collects the tax from the person they sell.
End user, yeah.
The end user. And a load of 10,000 gallons at today's prices is a big chunk of that. And then when you add federal, state, and local and the indexing, the check that people write to our DMV every month on fuel tax is huge. And so we do the tax collecting. And because if we don't do it, the state's going to have to do it. And we all know that the state isn't anywhere near as efficient. So that's where the 2% is. And it's something that we work hard on, explaining to legislators why this is needed. But each year we hold our breath because somebody gets this bright idea and it's not a huge amount of money. I mean,
in the grand scheme of things, though, it is. I mean,
I'm talking about to the 2% to the government, to the tax side, given the whole DMV budget or the whole fuel tax budget is minuscule.
Correct. I mean, as a jobber, and by no way, shape, or form are we the largest fuel distributor in Nevada. I'd like to say that we're middle of the road player. Not to get into specifics, but we cut checks in excess in the state of Nevada of $500,000 a month. And it's complicated. You got beginning and ending inventories. You have distribution that goes to people that are tax exempt, non-tax exempt, other wholesalers or end users. That affects the excise tax. You also have federal excise taxes. They change from state to state. You have to deal with the export issue if you're moving it across lines when you're allowed to, if you have the same spec fuel. So you go through this cumbersome process of filing your excise taxes and paying it to the state, and the state gives us a 2% allowance, meaning whatever the net tax payment you have to make is, you get 2% back for all the arduous amount of work that goes into filing those taxes. And for us, if you take 2% of $500,000 a month after month, year after year, it adds up. But there's a tremendous amount of work. I mean, we have 2 dedicated staff members that do just that, state and federal taxes. And a lot of it's automated. But we still have 2 people handling it.
But somebody still has to look at it, because the part you didn't mention is the penalties for messing up.
10%. If you're an hour late, if you file it an hour late, for us, that's a $50,000 bill by being 1 hour late.
Yeah. And so, again, the state's getting off cheap. Now they come in. The other part of this is how many audits our members have. I mean, when the state comes in to audit fuel taxes, I mean, your receipts can't be in a shoebox, and they know what they're doing.
And you can get audited not even if you don't have your own house in order, you can get audited if you're selling fuel to somebody that doesn't have their house in order. Let's say their taxes don't reconcile and the state
coming back to you.
Well, they'll not only go to them first, but if they can't get anywhere because they've got their receipts and shoe boxes and they're just not making any headway, they'll just go upstream to their supplier. So congratulations, now you have an audit because somebody else doesn't have their house in order. We've gone through that. We've gone through audits on our end where it's mostly a check the box scenario. Then we've gone through audits because you're selling fuel to somebody that doesn't have their house in order. So yeah, and those audits aren't very fun, because you're not progressing your day-to-day business activities during the audit. It's like a giant distraction from the day-to-day where you're trying to verify that what you're doing is above board so that you can just get back to your day job.
And the auditors, aren't really, while they're knowledgeable, they don't know the real nuances of your business. So they may, and they've got a book, they got rules, and rules don't, if it doesn't fit the particular situation, red flags. And anyway, so I believe those are the key reasons that the 2% collection allowance has survived. But each year we have to be on guard that legislators and tax people understand what's going on here, because it just seems
why it exists and how important it is. Yeah.
Why should they do that? But anyway, that's a big deal. Then the other thing I wanted to mention, and it's really near and dear to my heart, I'm wearing the little pin, is that about 2 years ago, I was in Washington, D.C. with this is a good example of what I'm talking about, why the National Association is important. I was having a meeting with my South Carolina counterpart, and his number two, and Gary Harris and Shannon, and we were talking about recognizing women in this business. And, they told me they had have a program. And so I ate all this stuff up, and I thought, because we have somebody quite well, was the state president, Christie, and Case. And
shout out to Christie.
And we've had Dana, we've had many, many women involved that they got the recognition while they were in the job. But what we wanted to do was provide a pathway. And you introduced me to a number of your staff. They contribute just like any guy does. And so we've got something I call it LEC, but it's leaders in
energy and convenience.
Convenience. And this thing's taken off. I'm really excited for the state association. I was to play a little part of that, but it's just fun because I think as labor markets tighten, finding quality people, we've got to provide a pathway, a way forward for those talented individuals that have demonstrated that they know their business, they know and have an opportunity to interact and guys have been doing it for years and network with other women in this case, but other people. There is, as there's a function tomorrow night here in Nevada, part of the WPMA. Well, it's really not part of it. It's Nevada's own. Just a reception to recognize women. And there's going to be a few of us men as hangers-on.
Allies. We're allies.
Yeah, we're allies. And that is really one of the areas that I was very honored to be.
Well, because I think there's a maybe it's not a misconception, but oil is very male-dominated industry, very blue-collar, and that's true. There's a lot of males in the industry. There's a lot of blue-collar work out there. Like you're going to see a lot more CDL fuel hazmat haulers that are men. Doesn't mean that we don't have women drivers. Our company's had women drivers, but there's far fewer of them. But there are other roles that there's a lot of women in. Sales and marketing roles, supply chain roles, accounting administrative roles, leadership roles. So I think what this was doing is it's making sure that, the quality of individuals that you have happen to be women, not only that are part of the association, which they are, but they stick around and then they provide some mentorship to some of the other people coming up because, for a long time, fossil fuels have been on the chopping block. You've donned the black hat of being the evil oil company. In reality, it's a necessary product. For the last over 100 years, our world, our country in particular, the infrastructure requires it. Your modern way of life requires it.
And it's into the future.
It's not going anywhere.
It's always going to be. I don't care what everybody wants to say about electric vehicles. We all know that that's an option, but fuel.
It's a great option. But guess what?
Some people.
Energy demand is going to double, particularly with artificial intelligence. And the only way that you get there is like everything above scenario. And when it's an everything above scenario, you go to what is the most reliable, what's the most efficient, cost competitive, what natural resources does your country have? And we're blessed. The United States, if you grew up in the United States, you hit the lottery. Thank God that you grew up in the United States because there's a lot worse parts of the world that you could have grown up in. We have a lot of natural gas. We have a lot of oil. We have a lot of raw materials here. And if we were just smart enough to extract those things responsibly and use them here, our country would flourish. And there are a lot of women that are a part of that. And I think this puts a spotlight on them, but also challenges them to make sure that they're mentoring that next generation that's coming up.
I want to say, and you haven't, I don't think, seen this picture, but when we were talking about putting this group together, I found a picture, and it must have been on like Facebook or somewhere, one of the social media things. Maybe it was just a Google search that we did. And I have a picture, and I haven't got the rights yet to the copyright if I need it, but it is a 1923 picture, and I'll show it to you when and as I say, it's not ready for live or prime time yet, but of two women in 1923 in Nye County, Nevada, standing there, and it says Union Gasoline, and they're there with a 55-gallon drum and a spigot, and it's in a holder, and these women are tough looking individuals.
Jobbers.
Yeah, jobbers. Exactly. They were out there, I guess, on the side of the road. I need to find more, because if I can get the copyright, or if even need a copyright anymore after all this time, it would be a great picture as sort of.
If you can get it, we'll throw it up in the episode to show people what we're talking about here. And shout out to Nye County, Tonopah.
So, I mean, those are the kind of things that an association can do. That's part of advancing the individual members' businesses.
Yeah.
And again, while I don't know your business or any of our members' business like you do, after all these years, I feel I got a pretty good understanding of what it's like to compete in this business, to run a family business, or really any business, and advance, because really it's your customer. If you don't service your customer, I don't care who you are or what business you're in, you're not going to be in business. And every day that's a battle. I know that there's somebody down the street that, whether they think the way to do it is sell price and that's all they sell, well, that'll eventually catch up with them.
Race to the bottom.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. So anyway, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Well, I know I speak for the rest of the jobbers and members out there that it's hard enough to run a business and stick around or survive multiple generations of a family business. It's very hard to do it when you have the boot of the government on the back of your neck. So we appreciate the work that you guys have done. You have been around a long time. So what's next for Peter Krueger? I know there's some changes going on right now, not only with the state association, but with your path forward. You want to share with us what's next for Peter Krueger?
Well, yes, if I can figure it out.
Yeah.
So after doing this for years, I'm just blessed that the association chose to bring Miranda Hoover and Charlie de la Paz on as to essentially, not essentially, to run the association. And I've worked with Miranda since about 2017. She is an individual that has a love, knows the people, and so I feel really great that that the leadership and the members have selected somebody who is younger, talented, more talented than I am, and will continue to advance the goals and objectives of the association. That being said, so I look around. I did some traveling right after this transition took place in October of 2024. So I did a little traveling and doing. I went to as we talked about, sailing America's Cup in Barcelona, which was a real thrill. And then went through Europe. I'm by German descent. I'd been to Munich, but I'd never been to Berlin. So spent time in Berlin and also in England. So got that out of my system. Went on a cruise, and I'm not a cruiser. So now I'm providing essentially moral support and wherever I can fill in for Miranda, do. So I'm at the legislature, not every day like I was before. Miranda and her team are there every day. But there are particular relationships and issues. We have a bill that when you were in the retail business, street signs, there's law that was like 30 and 40 years old. Well, the Department of Ag, who enforces that, a couple of years ago starts writing our members up. They call it a notice, NOV, notice of violation. They were doing their job because the law said one thing, and over the years we've gone to electronic signs and a whole bunch of things. Well, we interceded with the department and got them to agree. It wasn't an agreement not to enforce, but they had enforcement discretion. So if somebody wasn't just being violating the law on purpose, I mean, they made a good, because those signs, as you know, are very expensive. You can't just change them overnight. So the long story short, they backed off active enforcement, which meant that our members that were not in 100% compliance because of new technology were essentially given a break until this session. And so we're hearing a bill. We've already had one hearing that will simply upgrade the laws of Nevada to recognize how price signs really are done today.
And bring some continuity.
Yes, exactly.
Today's price signs.
And all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, those are the kind of things that I'm helping with now. I still enjoy it. I go down there to Carson a couple of times, it depends on a couple, 3 times a week. But the big difference is the people I grew up with in the 89 being the first session, pretty much either are no longer with us. I'm fortunate to still be here, but they're unelected. If they're elected officials or if they were agency people, they're all gone. So it's something that the effort to restart those relationships is Miranda and Charlie's job, because we've, like anything else, I suspect when I showed up in 89, the lobbying corps looked around and said, "Who are these kids?" Well, I'm saying the same thing. Who are these kids? But so I'm on tap to help where I can and how Miranda needs us, how the association needs us. I'm here in Vegas because I've got a lot of friends here, and of course I wanted to do this. And so after that, I have my health, and I spent a lot of time at Lake Tahoe in the summer. Skiing was great, but as I found, as you become a little older, the cold is not your friend, or at least as much it was. So I do that. I'm going to do some traveling. And it's just relationship building. I mean, that's the fun part of this.
It is. I mean, I can say, just from my own personal perspective, we had an opportunity to work with Miranda when Christy was the president, first ever woman president of Nevada Petroleum Marketers. Good job, Christy. We got a little bit familiar with Miranda. She went on to work with the Mining Association.
Right.
Continue to work with her there. So when I heard that that's who you were thinking as your successor, heir apparent, we were pretty pleased across the board because you got big shoes to fill. I've personally enjoyed working with you, hanging out at the different board meetings in whatever state they may occur in, going to DC every year and trying to stop bad bills from getting pushed through and playing defense for our industry. So I've learned a lot from you. I mean, you've definitely been one of the mentors to me. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention a couple other people. Mark Lytle, I know he was an important guy to both of us, definitely a mentor to me and my wife. And then Jack Kaysen. I mean, I wouldn't be here without Jack. I mean, I married into this. I wasn't born into this. And I'm really pleased that I was able to work in this industry because it's salt of the earth people, great relationships. Everybody rolls up their sleeves. They want to get the job done. And it's important. Ultimately, you're the last mile to get energy. So whether it's a hospital, whether it's a convenience store, whether it's home heating oil, whether it's the construction industry, the mining industry. I mean, what allows that equipment to continue to move and run smoothly are our products. And we're the ones on the front lines making sure that we get the products to those customers.
And when we have disruptions, our members are the ones on the highway with a tanker bringing the fuel.
In a generator, yeah.
In a generator. So, I mean, those are all important things. Fires, natural disasters. Our members are there keeping the first responders working. Yeah. Because their equipment, as you've indicated, won't work without diesel fuel or gasoline, really diesel fuel and lubricants.
Yeah.
So it's fun, it's exciting, and so I've been blessed to be part of it, plan to be part of it, just in a different role.
Well, it's been a pleasure working with you. Hopefully you don't sail off into the sunset and you stick around, maybe come back on and walk us through some of the legislation that comes out of this legislative session.
Well, that'd be fun.
All right.
Jason, thank you.
Thank you, Jordy. I appreciate it.